All right, thanks for having me. So I was thinking about kind of a funny or embarrassing story, and what I would share with you, and I want to give you a little context here. It really revolves around my first day of work at Lockheed Martin. So to set some context for you, I left Microsoft on a Thursday after providing 2 weeks of notice. And the CEO at Lockheed Martin, who I was going to work for, asked me if I could start on that Monday, not really take any time off. So when I asked him why, he shared with me, he says, we have our big management meeting, and he said, what I'd like to do is introduce you, to the top 500 leaders in the organization. I said, oh, okay, that sounds good. So I showed up to work on Monday morning in an auditorium with about 500 people, kind of in the first row. And unbeknownst to me, the CEO gets up on stage and says, hey, I'd like to introduce you to our newest leadership team member, John Lucas. And he said, you all know him. We've sent out information in the press release about him. John, would you please come up on stage? And I said, okay. So I walked up on stage, and the CEO hands me a microphone and says, John, you'd be willing to take a few questions, wouldn't you? And I said, oh, sure, Bob, I'd be happy to take a few questions. So we panned the audience, and the very first question I got was essentially, why in the hell would we ever hire somebody out of Microsoft to come here to Lockheed Martin? So it was like tap dance, tap dance, tap dance, figure out quickly, kind of an answer to this question. So here's the way I responded to the question. So I said, listen, I left a company with 75,000 engineers, and I came to work for a company with 75,000 engineers. So at the heart of both of these two organizations is a knowledge base of worker, and that hasn't changed for me. I said, I left a company that wrote 1 million lines of code each week, and I came to work for a company that writes 1 million lines of code each week. Now, what was interesting, I could see heads swiveling in the room. And later on, I found out that there were a number of people in that room who didn't realize that we wrote 1 million lines of code each week. Well, it gets even better. So I said, I left a company whose number one customer was the federal government. And I came to work for a company whose number one customer is the federal government. And some of those same heads were swiveling back and forth. And I said, yes, we sold more seats of Windows and Office into the federal government than we sold to any other employer. I said, in addition to that, both of these companies, Microsoft and Lockheed Martin, are committed to mission. Now, Bill and Steve would talk about it in terms of the reason why you would come to work for a company like Microsoft was to change the world. And the reason why you would come to work for a company like Lockheed Martin was to protect and defend it. So the heart of both these two organizations is a real importance around mission. Of course, I had to have a little bit of fun, right? So I came back and said, for whatever reason, I can't get away from these guys with the last name of Gates. And so when I left Microsoft, I left Bill on the West Coast. And when I come to Lockheed Martin, Robert Gates, was the Secretary of Defense. And the room erupted in laughter and then applause. That was the only question I took. I went off the stage, handed Bob the microphone back, and his comment to me was, oh my God, John, you have them in your hip pocket. But it's kind of the story that I was thinking about. So you go from petrified, how am I going to answer this question in front of a room full of people that don't know me from Adam, to putting a cogent answer together and having hit the mark with regard to the answer to the question.
I think the only way you could have done better would to literally take the mic and just drop it and walk away. I can't imagine the mental math you were doing while you were doing the tap dancing to make sure that everything was landing, because I guarantee you after that, everyone knew your name. There wasn't a single person in the audience who didn't remember you after something like that. That's incredible.
And it wasn't the last time I was challenged in a forum like that, but I think it was much more respectful, after
Right.
that. So
that's amazing, and like one of those moments where you just want to be like, "Man did that." I love it. I love it.
Hello and welcome to Skilled.
The podcast where we speak with remarkable L&D and HR leaders to hear the stories and strategies behind the skills that drive measurable success. I'm Karen Rosenfeld here with Omer Glass, GrowSpace's CEO. Today's guest is John Lucas. John is a three-time CHRO with over 35 years of HR experience, including senior executive roles at Stanley Black Decker, Goodyear, Lockheed Martin, Snyder's of Hanover, Microsoft, Kodak, and Merck. He's also a seasoned coach and advisor to C-suite executives and has led large global teams and has mentored 22 CHROs throughout his career. That's a lot. That's impressive. Hello and welcome, Don. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you, Karen, and good to be with you, Omer.
So the way we normally like to get things started is to have you sort of look back and think about that moment that even now when you think about it, other than that story, which obviously puts a smile on your face, to think about the success you've had, the thing you like to say, like hang your hat on all these years later. I think everyone has their sort of the thing they did that really for them personally made a difference, or for wherever they were working made a difference. I was wondering if you could share your sort of success story.
Yeah, I thought about it in terms of, as you reflect on a career that has been 35 plus years in the making. And the thing that I would point to that I'm most proud of is kind of one of the things that you referenced in kind of the intro, and that is, 22 former direct reports who either currently are or who have been sitting heads of human resources. And you think about the gift that keeps on giving, and you think about succession planning and the importance of doing it well and doing it right. That's kind of the legacy that you would hope to leave behind. I'm fortunate because I have former direct reports who have sat in the CHRO chairs at companies like, Northrop Grumman, like Goodyear, Lockheed Martin. In fact, the last three CHROs who have followed me all were direct reports of mine. Who else? I'm thinking about L3 Harris, United States Steel, Southern companies, um, Royal Caribbean are just some of the ones. But it's really gratifying to see people grow. And all those people are, by the way, much better than I ever was. So I think they grew exponentially, over their careers, and I'm very, very proud of each and every one of them.
As well, you should be. All right, now let us in on the secret sauce. How did you grow that bench of leaders?
Well, I think about it in terms of, is there that moment, in your career where you say, oh my gosh, um, and for me, I'll share a story with you. So I've had kind of a non-traditional, kind of path into the C-suite. So my first job out of graduate school was with a small privately held company, 20 million in revenue, 200 employees. So I was the head of HR for, this company. And so I spent 7.5 years there before I went big, before I went into the, Fortune 500. And it was so funny. My first venture into a Fortune 500 company was actually with a Fortune 15 company. And so I get hired into the company, and my boss says, we think you have great promise. We think you have great potential, John. One of the things we'd like to do is send you for an executive assessment. And I'm thinking, like, okay, what is this? And he said, well, it's a day and a half. We'll send you up to Minneapolis. You'll spend a day, and it's time testing and in basket exercises and role playing and the whole bit. But again, this is an investment we want to make in you. I said, okay. So I packed my bags. I go to Minneapolis for a day and a half. I went through a day and a half PDI, Personnel Decisions Incorporated assessment. And I'm thinking, my career path is into the C-suite, and what are the skills, that I need to grow and develop and fine tune. Well, I get the results back from the PDI assessment, and it was an eye opener for me, and not in a good way. So think about all the skills that I leveraged when I was with a small company. You think about things like, decision making, or you think about, command and control. when you're in a small company like that, and you're one of probably 4 or 5 people, really making all the decisions or in the organization, you're pretty much command and control. Well, when they evaluated me against my peer set of CHRO to bees, if you will, I was in like the bottom quartile on everything. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, what did I bite off here? So what was really funny, I made the commitment. Everything that was pointed out to me that where I needed to continue to grow and develop, I made a really intentional decision to work on those areas. And so the funny story then becomes 3 years later, I'm working for a different Fortune 500 company. They say, we see great promise in you, John. We would like to send you for an executive assessment. And I said, okay. And I said, who's it with? And they said, PDI, Personnel Decisions Incorporated. We use the New York office, so we'd like for you to spend a day and a half in New York with a PDI assessor. I said, okay, that sounds good. So I go in and I do a day and a half assessment with PDI. And, a couple of weeks later, after they score your assessment and, on how you did in the in basket exercise and the time testing and the whole bit, I sit down with the PhD who did my assessment. And she says to me, John, she said, I want to go over the results with you. I think you're going to feel really good about them. And I asked her, I said, did you take a look at my previous assessment? And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, did you take a look at the results from my previous PDI assessment that I had 3 years ago? She said, you never told me that you had a previous assessment with us. And I said, you never asked. And so in any event, she said, well, what office was it in? And so, of course, she queries, the assessment and pulls it up. And oh my goodness, it was interesting. Everything that was an area of significant development or growth turned out 3 years or 3.5 years later to be all areas of towering strengths. Things like collaboration. So John wasn't a very good collaborator when he first started out. He became much better, at collaborating with people. Decision making. Very tactical in my approach to decision making. Moved from there into kind of much better at strategy going forward. So all those, kind of things that served me very, very well in the small company that was not going to allow me to be on path to where I wanted to go. I know I needed to work on, and was diligent about working on those things.
Wow. First of all, I think it's brilliant because it's very impressive. I think that's the key to success eventually. If you feel like you got it all, then you cannot be better. And you must be better because you have bigger challenges, if you have high aspirations, but also because the world is changing. So you always need to adapt. So, first of all, I think it's brilliant. And now I maybe understand why growth space resonated with you because, like, you've been through that. And that's basically what we do as a company. But I'm curious, you didn't have growth space back then. How did you work on the skills, like on collaboration, on decision making? Like, how did you do, like, you bridge
Yeah.
this gap basically within 3 years?
Yeah. So I filled in the gaps when there wasn't growth space available to me 30 years ago. And so all of those areas that were not towering strengths for me, I found a colleague or a mentor who those were their strong suits. And I intentionally, made time with each of them, observed them, in meetings, and looked to kind of mimic, much of what they did. So it's that taking kind of self inventory, Omer, of saying, I'm here today. I want to be over here tomorrow. And how do I kind of close that gap? And there are people that do those things really well. It's picking out the right people that will help you grow and develop. And I've had some great coaches. I've had some great mentors, some great bosses along the way. I kind of say I'm kind of an amalgam of many of the leaders that I've worked for over all those years. So It's kind of fun.
Yeah, and actually, what I like about it, it wasn't just one person
Right.
because you had different skills and you wanted to make sure that like you're being supported by the right person because it's not one size fits all no matter how good the person is, which I think it's brilliant. It's basically, yeah, maybe you invented precision skill development. I don't know how long ago was it, this trip to New York, but yeah, it's brilliant. Basically you said, okay, I understand the skill gaps, and a lot of times organizations understand the skill gaps because you do assessments, like you invest
Right.
a lot of like time and money into it, and then you ask, how do I bridge that? And then what you did is just, okay, I need to be the better decision maker. Who is the best decision maker I
Right.
know who can teach me? I need to be a better collaborator, and probably the best decision maker wasn't necessarily the best collaborator, but you kind of like found, yeah. So it's brilliant.
Yeah. So it is, kind of skills development, targeted skills development by way of, picking the two, three, four leaders that those were their towering strengths, and being very attuned to that as well.
So in turn, now let's pivot to, okay, you grew the skills you needed to become an excellent leader. Now, how did you pivot downward and build that next generation of great leaders? Did you find them coaches and mentors? Like what was that process like then?
Yeah, part of it is, I think, being very candid with people. Open and honest communication is really, really important. And, sometimes, it takes a few of those conversations for people to really internalize, if I'm here and I have this deficiency and I need to get to here, how am I going to kind of close that gap? And then being very intentional about working with people to develop those. Again, one of the things that I admire about growth space is, even in the pilots that we've done at Stanley Black and Decker, we're not boiling the ocean. We're not going out and saying, what are the 10 areas you need to work on? We come back and say, what are the one or two gaps that we want to really focus you in on? And let's see demonstrated improvement in those one or two areas. And once we got those, one or two down, then maybe we'll expand it and go with another one or two. But don't boil the ocean. There's no need to do that.
I think one more thing that's very important is in order to grow leaders, it needs to be your focus as a leader. So it's not common. I don't think a lot of CHROs can share that 22 of their direct reports became CHROs. It's crazy. It's basically you multiplied yourself by 22. So I understand it's mentoring, but I wonder, A, was it always like that? Was it always your focus, or was it something that developed? Was it like a need to create a legacy or a deep care about other people's growth? And let's say I'm a CHRO that hears you, like, should I be focusing on that? Or so I
Yeah.
wonder what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was really benefited from the standpoint that my very first boss, who was much older than I was, um, took a vested interest in me and my development. So I had a great role model to start my career, and there were many things that I think he embedded in his own leadership style, his own managerial style, that resonated with me. Now, I will also tell you, I worked for a boss who was the worst boss I had ever worked for. So I went from working for the best boss I had ever worked for to the worst boss I had ever worked for. And he was kind of everything I didn't want to be. And so it was an interesting juxtaposition to take a look at, the two of them and saying, I certainly don't want to be this. And so you make kind of the intentional decisions around, I'm not going to do these things because I don't want to be like this. I made the comment earlier about kind of being an amalgam of many of the people that I've had the benefit and the opportunity of working with over my career. I can pull things out from different people I worked with and said, I really learned, you know, collaboration from this leader. I really learned strategic thinking capabilities. I'm putting an overarching plan together from this leader. I learned communication. Um, you know, from this particular leader. Even a process orientation in terms of these roles once you get in the C-suite are huge, and you got things coming at you. How do you handle the volume that comes to you? I had a leader in my career who was exceptional at that. So again, it's pulling the thread on all of those different leaders that you had worked for, and making that part of who you are as a leader going forward.
And do you have a system? Like, probably after you started saying, okay, this thing works and this person becomes CHRO, this person, like, can you identify a system of how you basically systematically grow your people who can eventually become C-suite themselves?
I think I can. I think I've done a pretty good job at kind of earmarking some of those folks along the way. Some of it is putting them in uncomfortable positions to stretch them, and you have somebody who's going along in their career swimmingly well, and they think they're on the right glide path to be a CHRO or in a C-suite job, and all of a sudden you tap them on the shoulder and say to them, I need you to go off into this area, and they're going, boss, I don't understand. I don't know anything about that. And you say, the reason I want you to go into, pick the topic, executive compensation, is you're going to pick up something in that time that will become, valuable to you when you sit in the big seat, if you will. So some of this is to step back and say, what does each of those people need? And then being very intentional and very deliberate about, moving the deck chairs around for people and giving them the opportunity to grow, and experience, what the role looks like from different chairs, if you will.
That's brilliant because it's, yeah, experiences and that are connected to also being prepared for the unexpected, uh, like the uncomfortable places. And I wonder, did you encourage them to do what you did, like matching them with experts in the domains they need to be better at?
Yeah, I mean, even little things. So for instance, one of the things that I benefited from, and this is really very simple, but there was a colleague of mine, a peer colleague of mine in Microsoft, and one of the things we said to each other is at the very end of our meetings together, we used to do an HR leadership team meeting once a month, and we would take literally 15 minutes at the very end of the meeting, and she would provide me feedback in terms of how I came across in that meeting. Hey, John, I thought you were brilliant. When you did these things or said these things. Let me tell you where I think you could have maybe approached this, this part of the discussion or conversation a little bit better. Then we flip the seat, and then I would do the same for her. But that was like peer to peer coaching, and that was invaluable to me. And so even something like that, Omer, you share that knowledge and information and say, one of the things you might want to consider doing is picking a peer of yours, and asking them to provide you with, honest, candid feedback, and you do the same for them. As I've always said, feedback, the benefit of feedback, it's a gift and it's free. It doesn't get any better than that.
Well, but I think that takes a certain level of humility to say, I want to actively hear where I'm not doing as well. Give it to me and then take it on without ego, without hesitation. I think if more people could do that, we would see people excelling so much faster.
Yeah.
Now, I first thing, I think if you haven't considered it, you should definitely consider writing a book on how you got. No, I'm not even joking, and I'll help you if you want. I think a lot of people could probably benefit from your wisdom. Just throwing that out there. The other thing though is, it's not all a bed of roses. I do want to hear your sort of story of where you did in fact miss the mark in terms of whether it's developing others, developing yourself, or what happened where things did go awry?
Yeah, so I provided this feedback to others. So one of the questions I've gotten, if I've gotten the question once, I've gotten the question probably 100 plus times, where people have said, "Is there a particular skill that's really important as you move up an organization? Senior levels of the organization, C-suite, if you will." And one of the areas where I've seen people fail the most is what I call, and I've this is my phraseology. I think the visual, as soon as I say it, you'll get it, is their ability to bungee jump. So think about it. To be able to go from strategy, 30,000 foot strategy, down to tactical execution, to deliver on what you've committed to delivering, and then back up to strategy. Because I've seen so many leaders throughout my career who can see around corners, who are really great at kind of putting an overarching strategy together, but fail miserably in their ability to either A, communicate that strategy into the organization, gain followership around that strategy, and then execute against it, or the reverse, where you have somebody who's really good at, tell me what you need me to do and I'll knock down the wall to go do it. And they're really good at that. But boy, they couldn't think their way out of a wet paper bag. And so it's an area again where if I go back and reflect on my own career, a towering strength for me in the early part of my career would have been the tactical execution. You tell me what hill you need me to go take and I'll go take it. I'll do whatever you need me to do. I'll work whatever hours you need me to work. But where I had the skill gap was in that strategic thinking ability, not only in that, but able to create followership and communication to bring the whole organization along with you. And so, again, that was something, Karen, that I had to make a conscious, effort around getting better and improving along the way. And I think if you talk to people who work for me, he, they would say he's got the ability to bungee jump. He'll go from strategy to tactical execution, do that seamlessly, and then bring everybody along with us, as well. So that would have been one of my gaps.
And what's if you're looking back now, what skills would you have told yourself to focus on at that when you were sort of just starting out as a CHRO, like at that juncture? What would you have told yourself to do to maybe get to that bungee place faster?
Yeah, part of it was around you know, not only strategy formulation, but to be able to take it, get the leadership team that you're working with on board with that strategy. So there's revs that need to be spent in terms of bringing the organization along with you. First, the leadership team. So your boss, the CEO, is clear. The senior leadership team is clear in terms of the direction that you want to go, why it's important, what's in it for them, if you will, and then your team, your senior HR leadership team, to bring them, up to speed and get them bought in to where we're going, and then the breadth of the organization. So even to the point where one of the process orientations that I, I was very rigorous around was we were going to do a global town hall meeting once a quarter as an HR organization. And not only myself, but my HR leadership team was going to be in front of the organization where we were going to give them an update on the progress against the strategy, what we did, well at, what gaps we had, and how we were planning on closing the gaps, and then kind of opening it up for questions and answers. But again, a kind of a process discipline to say, okay, how am I connecting the top to the bottom, and then ensuring we're all marching in the same direction, and providing that reinforcement along the way.
Amazing. I'm going to ask you maybe a strange question. What skills are you working on today?
Uh, well, now that I'm retired, so I've had the benefit of having worked for some terrific companies, most recently Stanley Black and Decker. I am not a do-it-yourselfer. And so one of the things I'm trying to learn more and more of is, as opposed to picking up the phone and calling somebody to come in and do XYZ for me, I've got a whole bevy of Stanley Black and Decker DeWalt tools now that I'm committed to learning how to use those in my retirement, and probably saving myself a little bit of money along the way. So I take great pride in that these days.
Oh, I love it. I think it's so important to like always find something new to challenge yourself with. So that's awesome, and I look forward to hearing what you're working on in the future.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
All right. Well, we are exactly at the 30-minute mark. We've done pretty well for ourselves. John, this has been so interesting and insightful. I think you have that rare quality of being able to really see things from 30,000, feet in the air, but also like at eye level with people. And that's a rare commodity. And it's just always a treat to speak with you. So I really want to thank you for taking the time today.
No, it's been my pleasure.